guys, welcome to my channel. I hope everything is okay in your life. This video series has been prepared for general features of the classes in BDO to be conveyed to you by the Classmasters in appropriate way. The information contained in this video is limited and will not be a detailed guide. In the content you will meet, there will be an interview about the structure of the class in general. If you have friends around you who have questions about this class, they will probably be able to find general answers. The purpose of interview is to convey the class to you in a short and fun way. First, you will watch official trailer of the class, then we will start chatting with our guests. During the chat, I will add as many images as possible and try to provide you with a better information transfer. I hope you enjoy these contents. All these and similar classes will be completed and published in time. If you do not want to miss the moment when they are published, do not forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification button. Enjoy watching. Well, hello, welcome. Today's guest is Choice for Berserker class. Welcome, Choice. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing really good.
May you please introduce yourself to us?
Yeah, so my name is Severio, but I go on the internet by choice, and I'm 28 years old, and I've been playing BDO for over 5 years now, and I play on the North American servers.
How did you find BDO? From a friend or website, or how you go into MMORPG games? How did you decide to play this game?
So I was a long-term RuneScape player. I had played that game for nearly 15 years, and it was my primary game. And then when Black Desert Online released on Steam, a friend of mine, actually a couple friends of mine, found the game, and they were like, hey, we should try this out. It could be cool to try a new MMO. And then from there, I kind of got hooked on it. So I've been playing pretty much since day one Steam release of the game.
We know Berserker is kind of different from the other classes, bigger, larger, How many years have you been playing your class? Is this your first class? Are there any other classes that you started the game with or tried ever?
So my Zerker was the very first class that I ever made. I've stuck with it the entire time. I've been playing over 5 years, so 5 years has been my main. There was a couple of times where I was considering playing another class like a ninja or a wizard, but I never ultimately ended up doing it. But when the tag system came out, I did end up trying Striker, and that's been sort of my PvE character for the last year and a half.
So for now, you don't want to reroll, but Striker only for PvE, huh?
Yep, I do plan after certain PvE goals are accomplished. I want to tag new classes just to try and learn them, but for now I'm really happy with Berserker.
So let's talk about Awakening or Succession. Which one do you using in these days for your Berserker and why?
So I use Succession ever since the reboots. So previously, before the reboot happened in December, I was playing Awakening, and ultimately after the reboot happened, Awakening became a lot more ranged oriented and a lot more kiting people oriented. I've always liked that big, bulky Zerker, going in and being that melee class and disrupting. And I felt like the Succession gameplay was more conducive to that playstyle compared to Awakening. So I'm on Succession right now.
I remember that Session Circle was broken before 4 or 5 months ago, so they changed a bit. 3 or 4 skills changed from Super Armor to Front Guard. Are they really necessary or that much nerf? What do you think about it?
Yeah, so we also lost some CCs as well, but the frontal guards are probably the biggest factor. I do think that it was a fair change. I don't like that certain classes in general have pure super armor builds, because if you can just rotate super armors constantly, that makes it really hard for non-grab classes to do anything. So I do like that my class has openings, and you also, can utilize those frontal guards to mitigate some damage, which we never were able to do before. So it's not necessarily purely a nerf, but it's definitely a change.
Okay, when I saw that change, I said to myself, this class will still be strong, but after that change, you should use your brain to rotate your front guard between your enemy. Before that, people just spamming the old super armors and giving some distraction to the enemy.
Yeah, I'm very happy that they did make the change. I think that they should focus on doing that to a lot of other classes. I would like to see strikers and perhaps even DKs be a little bit more reliant on frontal guard, because with a lot of SA, even Mystics have a lot of SA, it kind of doesn't leave a lot of room for the non-grab classes.
I agree with that. So let's talk about Awakening PvE. What do you think about for early game?
So Awakening PvE is pretty good early game. It's actually a very mobile class, and you can farm just as fast as really any other class, especially on squishy mobs. However, the class is very, very intensive in regards to the amount of inputs and how, I guess, hard you have to try compared to a lot. So it is something that's a much more active early game grind.
What about mid game like Cycrea, Orcs, Bloody Monastery, Thornwood Forest, these kind of spots?
I think that this is where Awakening Zerker shines the most. It has very low cooldowns on a lot of its hardest hitting Awakening abilities, and it gives you just enough time from traveling from pack to pack to get those cooldowns back. And so I find that it's actually my preference, even over Succession, in grinding a lot of these spots where you're kind of grouping up mobs and killing them in a sequence.
Okay, what about endgame? I know you mostly grind with your striker, but what about Berserker these days?
Yeah, so I think that it's a good grinder still, even in endgame spots. However, in spots like Olin's, you're going to run into the issue of, because of the shy speeding you up, you're going to run out of really good damaging abilities. In places like Gyfins and Hex and Trolls, it's not as much of an issue, still a little bit of an issue, but it's not that bad. At Olin's, I would say it's almost unplayable in if you want to be a meta class there.
So let's talk about Awakening PvP. For 1v1, 1vx, 3 versus 3, like, I don't know, Solar, 5 versus 5, or large scale on Node Siege.
So this is probably Zerker's strongest point. I think that Awakening Berserker is one of the most powerful classes when it comes to larger scale PvP, smaller scale PvP. Anything that is, I'd say, 3v3 or 2v2 and up, it's actually very, very, very strong. It's got ranged knockdowns, it's got a lot of access to a lot of damage, it's able to kite, it's got great movement, and you're gonna notice that in larger scale fights, that's where a lot of Zerkers are really shining, is because the amount of damage that it does and how protected it can be from ranged is really, really good. In 1v1s, it has a lot of really favorable matchups, particularly against non-grab classes. It's almost unfair because the Zerker can grab very quickly and can move around very easily. It's really against the fast moving classes that also have grabs where you're going to struggle. But I don't think that there's a single class that it can't actually fight and do well against, except for maybe sorceresses and ninjas and kunos, maybe. But those, everybody kind of struggles with those classes a bit.
Yeah, there's assassin class at all. When you talk, it seems very easy, but I know Awakening, especially Awakening Berserker, is very hard to become a master. Is this true?
Definitely. It is one of the most reliant classes on using mouse to move abilities. So when you use mouse to move abilities, it allows you to essentially move your character in ways that the game necessarily didn't design. So a console player that doesn't have access to it would play much differently than an Awakening Berserker on PC. And so there's a lot of things you can use in like Giant Leap where you can jump backwards, but you end up jumping forwards, or you can use that Giant Leap to direct where your character is going to land instead of a straight line, and then you can follow up with grabs really easily. There's also certain abilities that launch you backwards that CC, but with mouse to move you can make it so that you launch forward. So it's actually a very, very, very high skill cap class. I'd say one of the highest just because of mouse to move.
Let's talk about Succession. What about Succession PvE?
So Succession PvE, I think that Succession PvE is one of the best in the entire game. Berserker Succession is just amazing at Hex Sanctuary. And so in endgame spots, you're going to find that you can make some of the most money compared to any other class. And even in spots like Olins and Trolls and Gyfin, it has pretty much unlimited access to damage. It's a very consistent damaging class. And then even in the early game and the mid game, the AoEs are quite large for those mid-game spots, so it actually does very, very well at, Sukraya and Bloody Monastery, where you need consistent big AoE damage. And then for early game spots, we can actually hold down 5 buttons. If you just hold A, S, Shift, Space, and RMB, you will do Windstorm, which is part of Beastly Windslash, over and over and over again, and it makes it where those squishy mobs just die so quickly, and your pets barely can keep up, and you're just holding down 5 buttons. So it's really, really, really great for early game.
Succession Berserker is a bit different than the other class because you are turning into a beast. I don't know the name of that skill, but you're turning into a beast. What is this?
Right. So beast form it's kind of like it used to be something that only activated when you popped your E buff and it would enhance certain abilities. But ever since the reboot, beast form is almost the default. So you're pretty much always going to be in beast form, and very rarely will you ever not be. And what it does is it enhances certain abilities. So instead of weakling hunt, for example, being this ability that kind of does nothing without beast form, it instead launches you forward and you can knock back players, and it's a frontal guard. It enhances your ultimate ability and makes it do more damage. It also makes it where when you use abilities like Predatory Hunt, after a Lava Piercer, you can jump really high in the air, and it provides a large AoE blast. So it essentially enhances a lot of the kit of Berserker and is pretty much the standard. You almost always want to stay in beast form when grinding or PvPing, other than early game spots where it doesn't matter. You just hold those 5 buttons and that's it.
I want to ask about how good is this class against evasions?
Both classes are very, very good against evasion, particularly in 1v1 situations. So we have access to a minus 12% evasion debuff, as well as a 15% accuracy buff to everything. And essentially, we don't really require a lot of accuracy. We also have accuracy in our passive as well, which gives us a base rate, as long as we're in a guild, of 13%. And so our accuracy overall is pretty phenomenal, and we don't really struggle, especially in Awakening, with killing evasion targets. Succession does have lower accuracy mods on the abilities, which makes it a little bit worse, but still very, very good. But in larger scale PvP, you'll find that because you can't activate those evasion debuffs and the accuracy buffs, because they are unprotected and very solo oriented abilities, that we do need accuracy in larger scale PvP where we can't apply those debuffs. And yeah, that's where accuracy accessories would come in.
What about Succession PvP? Succession PvP is kind of different than Awakening. You are not focusing only for damage, I think. You're changing the game itself. What is this?
Yeah, so I think the big difference with Succession over Awakening is kind of like a solo assassin where you're creating opportunities for yourself by knocking down players and going in for a single target kill, whereas Succession is more about jumping into a large group of players, if you're in a node war, and using the big AoE abilities that it has to try and CC targets so your team can follow up, or if you have enough gear, you're just able to use those big AoEs and get kills on people because of it does like very, very solid damage. And then when it comes to more 1v1 PvP, I think the best way to summarize it is Awakening Berserker is much more skittish in that you're going to be kiting a lot and not necessarily being as aggressive, whereas Succession is pretty much all aggression all the time. You're just going after the target, you're constantly putting out CCs, and you're just chasing after people trying to burn their stamina. And yeah, I'd say that's probably why I wanted to play Succession more, is I felt that you're more of like the wolf instead of the sheep when you're playing Succession, and I felt that Awakening was just a little bit too sheepish.
So what about evasion or damage reduction? You played both for a long time and you tested in almost every situation. What do you think about this class? Damage reduction or evasion?
Well, Berserker actually has the lowest base evasion rate of any class, and it has the highest damage reduction rate of any class. So just based on the hidden stats or the base stats of the class, it's definitely more tuned for damage reduction. I do think that it's possible to run very, very large amounts of evasion to lower your damage significantly, and you will become tankier than if you were running damage reduction. However, damage trade-off I think is way too high. You're losing way too much damage for the little bit of tankiness that you gain. And there's also a lot of classes that simply ignore a lot of that evasion. So if you're fighting Maewas, if you're fighting Succession Sages, you're fighting Dark Knights, or you're fighting Draconias, that extra benefit of having all that evasion just quickly turns into nothing, and all of a sudden you've just lowered your damage for no reason. So I definitely recommend damage reduction. It's a slightly squishier but way more damage oriented build.
You know what, I want this one in this game. We have evasion based class and their base evasion is very high according to our classes. I'm playing Valkyrie. And I want, they all have passive percentage evasion and they also have percentage evasion buff. And what about if they give us a percentage DR a bit more instead of DP? Because I have 20 DP or 30 DP passive and I'm getting maybe 20 DP from my skills, but it changed nothing. What if they give us damage reduction percentage buff? I think it will a little bit help us.
I would say about 2 years ago, I remember having that same sort of idea. And ultimately, I think the best way to approach it is I think that every class should have an evasion passive and an evasion active on some of their skills. So if you're a striker and you build evasion, you're very tanky, but strikers can build DR and they can be just as tanky as a Valk or a warrior, even with, they can build both. Whereas DR classes like Zerkers and Valkyries, we can't build evasion very effectively, so we're forced to build DR. So I would like to see more variety in builds in the game, and I would like for classes to have the option of being evasion and, sacrificing damage by putting in artifacts and lightstones that are more evasion based, or wearing a Kudum instead of a Nuver. So give us the option of building evasion on every class, because every class has the option of building DR. So why is it that that's not the case where every class can build evasion?
So what do you think about BDO's current situation from past for now?
So I think that BDO is in a much, much better position now than it was back when I started 5 years ago. I think they've made a lot of great improvements to the game, particularly the combat. Back when I first started, there was no CC limits, which means that you could infinitely grab people. And I mean this quite literally 13 times in a row on a Berserker. And it was one catch equals the person is dead guaranteed, because the combos can last 40 seconds. It's quite ridiculous. So now I think that's much better. I also think that the game is much more fast paced, and that feels really, really fun because, even if you make a mistake and you die, opponent makes a mistake, they die as well. And that type of fast paced combat can be very fun. I'm not a huge fan of the one shot meta. I do think that it can be tuned down, but a really really good baseline is Solaire, the Reno Solaire that just came out. I'm very happy with that piece of content. I think that creates competitive PvP environment, and it's made the combat so much better and much more team oriented, which I like a lot. And then in terms of other things that they've added to Black Desert is they've done a really good job of preserving the value of gear. Back when I started playing, a pen crescent was like the best accessory, and now the best accessory for your ring is a tongue grad, which is only 1 more AP. So crescents are not irrelevant at all. So if you had one back then, you have one now, it's still good. So they've done a really good job in preserving the the value of your gear. And then in terms of PvE, I know it's brand new, or not necessarily brand new, it's about a year old now, but the dungeons that they came out with, I'm really happy with more difficult PvE. And instead of just grinding monsters and getting money, I like that they're adding new little, gimmicks to certain spots that make them unique, as well as more difficult PvE encounters like the dungeons. So I think that the game is going in a good direction. I just hope that they continue making strides in making PvP more fun and accessible and profitable even, as well as making strides in making PvE more difficult and requiring a lot of learning curve instead of just kill monsters in a circle.
I know you talk about in your streams these kind of subjects. I want your recommendations. If you have a chance to add new feature for BDO or change something, what would it be? For example, we talked about crystal presets, dead game items like you are grinding right now. Olons, leaf, loans, and Olukas, all of them just trash, but they're rare. These kind of stuffs are dead. What are you thinking about?
I think the number one thing, I'm a believer in giving players easier access to playing new classes. I feel very limited right now in playing my 2 classes because that's all you can really do with one tag. And I also find it limiting to try new classes when a lot of them require a lot of investment in skill points, a lot of investment into weight and inventory and all those things like that. You got to get your health level, your breath level, all that stuff up. I would really hope for a much easier way to play new classes, perhaps adding an additional tag slot and perhaps adding a system with tagging where it will mirror your skill points and mirror your weight and inventory and all that stuff, which essentially would allow you to try new classes as much as you wanted without having to worry about all that extra fluff that goes along with preparing to play a new class. And I know that that may create a meta where people are constantly playing the meta classes, but I think that over time those metas will be exposed as they have in the past, and those classes will eventually just get put down to where they need to be in terms of their balance. And it might even be a way for Perlibus to monitor, wow, there's this many people playing this class, it must be very strong, we should look into this data. So I would hope that a lot more easier access to playing new classes as much as you desire, essentially.
Okay, any other changes you want?
Well, conceptually, this is a really big one, and I don't know, this would require a very large change to the game, but I would really like the game to have more of an option to do high-level PvE for your main source of income. Right now, we do have the 2 dungeons, and while I do appreciate them, they are on a week cooldown, which makes it where they're just not worth it to run more than once a week. And I would really like the dependence of having to grind mobs in a circle for several hours. I would like that dependence to be instead on maybe there are a bunch of dungeons that are repeatable that you can do over and over, or different types of raids, or there's maybe a tower where you can climb floors and get more skilled in defeating monsters, or just more bosses in general that require a lot of active thought, skill, and gear. Something that really makes people want to get more gear so that they can, more successfully kill these bosses that they've maybe never killed in the past, or maybe climb to that higher floor in the tower that you've never gotten to before. But the big thing that's important with that content is I really need it to be repeatable content, because if it's weekly lockout, or if it's, something you can only do at a limited amount, you're going to feel on the days that you want to play BDO for 6 hours, you're going to feel like you have to go and grind in order to progress. And I really wish that the game didn't have that dependence on feeling the need to grind to progress. I wish there were more skill-based and thought-provoking activities that allowed you to progress.
What are your advices for newbie or returnee or whoever wants to reroll Berserker?
So my advice, if you're a brand new player, make sure that you sign up for a seasonal character. It's going to help you progress really, really fast, getting full Pen to Vala by the season, and it essentially allows you to accelerate your progress quite quickly. In regards to learning how to play a Berserker, if you've never played it before, there's a lot of really good resources out there. There's a ton of guides on YouTube made by a lot of really good creators. And there's also a Berserker Discord, which does have some pretty helpful members. It's not a very toxic Discord like some of the other class Discords. So they're very open to asking questions, and they do have a lot of resources to learn things like combos. And there's a lot of movement guides on there. And realistically, the number one advice, the advice that I always take when I try to learn something new is try to learn from somebody that already knows what they're doing, and then you can adapt your playstyle to be perhaps even better than what you learned. But at least nail down how to play just as somebody else would, and then improve it from there. So I don't really recommend people try to learn it by themselves, because I think that a lot of that learning curve can be immediately removed by just learning how to do something instantly from someone who already knows, and then adapt your playstyle from there. So that's why I really recommend the resources in like the Berserker Discord, and a lot of really good YouTubers.
You are the best, I think, for Berserker.
Well, I do have some guides. I wish I did make more guides, but I typically do make some that are mostly frequently asked questions when I am streaming. So you will find some videos from my channel, but Yofamsteve, he makes a lot of really good guides, and there's a lot of really good guides from other regions as well that I do recommend. I don't think I've seen a bad guide on Succession Zerker on YouTube. So whatever you find, as long as it has some good viewership and you make sure that the positive comments, you're very likely to find success in watching those.
We're coming towards the end of the interview. Is there anything you would like to add?
Well, I guess the only thing I want to add is that just Black Desert is a great game, and I know that there's a lot of stigma about the game from several years ago, but honestly, the game itself is very, very welcoming to new players. They've made a lot of really good strides in making progression much faster, and there's a lot of opportunities to get into the combat of the game with having capped gear now in a lot of wars as well as Solaire. It makes it where you don't need to invest, a crazy amount of time in order to enjoy the game. So if you're on the fence about it, I definitely recommend it. It's awesome for long-term progression, really fun combat, and if you're hesitant, you really don't need to spend a lot of money in order to get far in this game. The most strongest players in Black Desert have spent very little, if nothing, and they have gone very, very far and very competitive with even people that have spent several thousands on the game.
Finally, I can say thanks to Choice. As you guys know, most of you know him probably. I can say most famous streamer, and I can say YouTuber for BDO. I want to say thank you. He visit our interviews. He accept my invitation. I want to say thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me. It's actually really fun. I like doing stuff like this, so I look forward to watching it back on YouTube.
Thank you so much. Alright guys, do not forget, video is just a game. Have a nice game.